Today we're going to start to look at how to add when you've got positive and negative numbers together. So we're adding these real positive and negative numbers. A little bit of vocabulary. We're going to look at some properties that are going to help us in terms of adding positives and negatives. The first one is this additive identity. I'm going to add the word property. The additive identity property in math basically says, what can you add to a number so it keeps its identity? If you've got 1, what do you add to it to keep it 1? 1 plus 0 equals 1. You guys agree? That's all the additive identity property says, that you can add 0 and the number keeps its identity. And with variables in algebraic terms, any number a plus 0 equals a. So we're going to refer to that where adding 0 to something doesn't change its identity. The other one is this additive inverse. And what that says, we're going to make that additive inverse property. What that says is if you take any number, let's say 1, you can add its inverse to it. Another name for inverse is opposite. And we already talked about opposites. What's the opposite of 1? Negative 1. If you added negative 1 to 1, what would happen? It would go away, right? It would be 0. If you add anything with its inverse, its opposite, it's going to be 0. Right? So in algebraic terms, a plus the opposite of a, negative a, is just going to be 0. Okay, so a little bit more complicated name for an idea that you guys understand already. All right, we're going to look at how to add positive and negative numbers together. So we're going to look at a few ways to do this, and the first way is to do it on a number line. If we've just got this problem to do, negative 5 plus 7. Let's just kind of review these rules because you've heard these before. We just need to make sure that we can get really fast at doing these and we can be really accurate when we do them. If you were doing this with a number line, you'd start at negative 5. Here's negative 5. And we'd add 7. You'd go to the right 7 because adding 7 means you're getting more. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And where do you end up at? Positive 2. Start at negative 5. Move 7 units. When it's positive, you're moving to the right. And where do you end up at? 2. All right, so negative 5 plus 7 is 2. That's one way to do it. You're welcome to draw number lines anytime you want. It's just that sometimes it's not very efficient to have to draw a number line every time you want to add 2 numbers. All right, let's do another one with a negative just so we understand the idea of it, and then let's see if we can do it in ways that are faster in our head. So negative 3, you start here. This time we're adding negative 4 to it. We're not getting bigger, we're adding negative, so we're going down 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're ending up at negative 7. So we start at negative 3. We moved 4 units this time to the left, and we end at negative 7. So negative 3 plus negative 4 is negative 7. The biggest thing to take away from this, guys, is that if you're at a negative and you add more negatives, you're getting more negative. Right? So always an idea, always a possibility to draw a number line if you're not sure. Let's look at seeing if we can kind of memorize what happens a little bit more so that we don't need to rely on a number line. All right, this is going to be huge for you guys, this rules of addition, where you put a huge star next to that. Okay, to add 2 numbers with the same sign, this would be both positive or both negative. Right? Both positive or both negative. We've been adding positive numbers our whole lives, right? 1 plus 2, you've always done that. So the only new thing here is if they're both negative. For this, what we're going to look at is we are going to add their absolute values. This is why one of the reasons we talked about absolute values. You add their absolute values. The sum has the same sign as the numbers added. Let me show you an example so that you can see how this makes sense. So if you've got negative 5 and negative 7, they have the same sign. They're both negative. We say add up their absolute values. How far away are they from 0? That's what absolute value was, remember? Negative 5 is 5 away from 0. Negative 7 is 7 away from 0. So what's 5 and 7? 12. But then the answer, the sum, has the same sign as both of those numbers. So both of those were negative, so this stays negative. Now, does that make sense? A negative plus another negative is getting more negative. Okay? Let's do one more example. Let's say we had -2 plus -3. How far is 2 away from 0? 2, 3, 3. -3 is 3. So we're going to add those two absolute values. 2 plus 3 is 5, but this was a negative plus a negative, so it gets more negative. That's going to be a -5. That is not too bad. Now, what if I had 1 plus 2? Do you even need to go through these things in your head? You know that 1 plus 2 is 3. They're both positive, so the answer stays positive. Now, here is where it's a little bit trickier. To add two numbers with different signs, we subtract the lower absolute value. Okay, I'll show you this in a second. And the sum has the same sign as the number with the bigger absolute value. Okay, let's look at this and apply those rules. I've got -10 plus 4. These are not the same sign. They're not both positive or both negative. So these rules don't apply over here. I can't just add them up. I can't say 10 plus 4. What I need to look at is I'm going to subtract one from the other. So just looking at absolute values, this would be 10 and 4, right? We're in our head going to subtract them. What's 10 minus 4? 6, right? Now the question is it +6 or a -6? And the answer is that it has the same sign as the number with the bigger absolute value. Which one had the bigger absolute value? This was 10, this one's 4. It's this one. Was that positive or negative? Negative, so our answer is negative. And think about it on a number line. If you're at -10 and you add 4, are you going to pass 0? No, you're still going to be in the negatives. So when you've got one positive and one negative, you honestly just subtract them, the absolute values, don't worry about the negatives, subtract the absolute values, and then whichever number was bigger to begin with, whichever absolute value was bigger, you keep that sign. So let's try that a few more times until we can get really good at doing that and thinking about it that way. Negative plus another negative. Guys, same sign. We add them together without the negatives, and then the answer stays negative. A negative plus another negative gets more negative. So what's 2.5 plus 4.2? All right, 2.5 plus 4.2. That's going to be 2 plus 4 is 6. Here, we don't really need this little symbol right there. 2 plus 4 is 6, and 0.5 plus 0.2 is 0.7. And because a negative plus another negative gets more negative, that is a negative 6.7. Okay, let's look at this guy. One's positive, one's negative. So now we've got this situation here where we're actually in our head, we're going to subtract them. So we just look at the absolute values, the positive versions. So in my head, I'm going to do 15.0 minus 10.5. You just take the biggest minus the smallest. 15 minus 10.5. Okay, I don't need this extra step here. What would be 15 minus 10? That would be 5 minus another 0.5. So I'm looking at 4.5. And then I've got to look at which absolute value was bigger, 15 or 10.5. 15, and that number was negative, so my answer's got to be negative. And does that make sense? If I'm at 10.5, somewhere positive over here, and I'm going down 15, am I going to pass 0 and go into the negatives? Yeah, I am. I'm going to end up at negative 4.5. All right, so as we're looking at this, can we try these? Negative plus a negative gets more negative, and you just add those absolute values. 7 plus 3 is 10, negative 10. This one, positive plus a negative. If that's the case, we, up here, subtract. We subtract them first. So the biggest minus the smallest, 9.6 minus 2.1 is going to be 9 minus 2 is 7, and 0.6 minus 0.1 is 0.5. And now look and see which one was the bigger absolute value. This 9.6 was bigger, and it was positive, so my answer is positive. If I'm at 9.6 and I go down 2 more, am I going to get into the negatives? No. that. Okay, we're going to look a little bit at some properties of addition right now, and these are things that I know you have heard before, and some that are just a quick review. The commutative property, we've talked about this. The order that you add numbers doesn't matter, right? A plus B is the same as B plus A. You guys know that. So -1 plus 3 is the same as 3 plus -1. That right there is the commutative property. Just the order can change. We know that. The associative property just says you can change the grouping. You can change the parentheses. So if you did A plus B plus C and you did A plus B first here, you keep the numbers in the same order, A plus B plus C, but you can move where the parentheses are. You could do B plus C first and then do plus A. It doesn't matter if it's all adding. And then we've got, in numbers, 1 plus 2 plus 3 is the same as 1 plus 2 plus 3. You don't mess around with the order of the numbers. You're just changing where you do your grouping. So that guy is the associative property. Identity property we just talked about, that additive identity property. What's A plus 0? It's just A, right? A plus 0 is just A. We don't even really need any of this other stuff in the middle. A plus 0 equals A. 4 plus 0 equals 4. There you go. And then the inverse property we talked about, A plus the opposite of A, and we don't need anything in between here. A plus the opposite of A cancels out. They go away. It's just 0. So -9 plus what? What's the opposite of -9? 9 is 0. So we've got 4 properties we're introducing that are ones that you've known, but now we might refer to them a little bit more, so you've got to be able to recognize which one is which. All right, looking at these properties, can you identify the property? X plus 5 is the same as 5 plus X. That means that it doesn't matter what order you add, it's going to be the same thing. Which property is that going to be? That's our commutative property. You can change the order, and it doesn't matter. Now, I will tell you guys, this is the most commonly misspelled word, commutative, tutive. There's no N in there. I get a lot of people that put commutative property of addition. I'll do prop. We can abbreviate that. What about this one? Y plus 0, you add something to Y and it keeps its identity. Identity property of addition. It's also known as the additive identity property. It means the same thing. All right, so if you're watching this on your own, you can pause the video and just see if you can do these two and just name me the property. Okay, if you're watching it as a class, I'll give you a second. And we'll do this together in a minute here. Do we know number 3? Negative plus its opposite is 0. They cancel each other out. That is called this guy right here, the inverse property of addition, or the additive inverse property. Is it important to put of addition in some way? Yeah. Because there's also inverse properties of other things too. There's, for example, you could have the commutative property of multiplication or the identity property of multiplication as well. So that's why we've got that of addition. Now this guy, what's moving? Are the numbers moving? No, just these grouping symbols are moving. So when we move the grouping symbols, that's the associative property of addition. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to do some practice where you are doing some property recognition, but also we are going to be doing a lot of practice where you are adding two numbers, positive and negative. So this page should stay open while you're working so that you can look back until you do a ton of these and you get the hang of really getting positives and negatives when you're adding them together and knowing whether the answer is going to be positive or negative with each one.